Good afternoon and welcome all. Still got a couple of people joining us here. Welcome everyone. Thank you for being with us today. All right, as we wait for some more folks to join us, I'm going to go ahead right now and turn it to Dr. Lois Sprague to start us off.
Thank you so much. When I agreed to come on to this panel this afternoon, my understanding was that it was going to be held at St. Paul's, and then it got moved to this format that we use right now, which is a very different one than being in person. So I'm going to ask you for a moment to center yourself and imagine yourself at St. Paul's. Take a deep breath. Feel the weight of your body in your chair and imagine that you're sitting in a classroom at St. Paul's around a large rectangular table, and allow yourself to become aware of your body's awareness of the people around you. There are people at either side. There are people in front of you. And as you recognize that, also be aware of what's behind you. Feel the presence of being with others. As you breathe in and breathe out. Settle into this space and into the comfort of being in your body and aware through your body of a connection. And as we shift back into Zoom, try to hold that connection. All of us within our physical space have an animal sense. And we need to work to keep that animal sense alive with us, not lock it outside of the screen. So even as you sit on Zoom today, be aware of the animal part of you that is still connected to everything that is going on around you. Carry that awareness as we move into this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I'm going to share my screen to share a video welcome from Bishop John Harvey Taylor. One moment.
I'm Bishop John Harvey Taylor of the Episcopal Diocese of Los Angeles. On behalf of our chair, Dot Leach, and all the members of the program group on Ecumenical and Interreligious Life, it's my blessing to welcome you, or welcome back, to the second installment of our Losing Truth series. My thanks to my fellow former journalist, Dot, for her amazing work conceiving and organizing this series, and today's panelists, my friends and colleagues Paul Anthony Daniels, Andy Guilford, and Lois Sprague. Like our panelists last week, our speakers will deepen our understanding and give us some tools for combating the fever of misinformation and intentional falsehood that preys on our politics and rips us friend from friend, neighbor from neighbor, parent from child, region from region. This timely series of conversations is occurring as misinformation and lies continue to put at risk the lives of school children, hospital patients and workers, and our Haitian and Haitian American neighbors in Springfield, Ohio. Last week, I opened our proceedings with a moment of personal repentance. I described 2 times when, based on imperfect or incomplete information, I jumped to unfair conclusions about a sports figure I didn't know much about and a politician I didn't care for very much. The media marketplace makes it easy to find our way to what we want to hear instead of what we need to hear. And social media algorithms seem to read our very minds, reassuring us and soothing us in our biases and in our predispositions. News sources vary wildly in their expertise and in their ethics. One of my mentors, the late Ray Price, who was President Nixon's chief speechwriter, said back in the day there were newspapers and magazines he refused to read because he knew he couldn't trust the reporting. And he was afraid he'd read something he agreed with or enjoyed, especially if it was about somebody he didn't like, and the nugget would lodge in his memory without a footnote identifying the questionable source. Our speakers today, a priest and theologian willing to speak difficult truths, a judge who takes truth seriously because he had the power to send people to prison based on his best judgment about information presented in court, and an interfaith leader whose life's mission is celebrating the truths that bind us all together, no matter our beliefs or doctrines. With Dot and this Trinity, I guarantee that we're not going to lose any truth, at least for the next 2 hours. So again, welcome. Let us know what you think about this series. We're recording it so you can share it with congregational and neighborhood discussion groups. Thanks for being part of it. And now, let's please welcome and thank Dot.
Thank you, Bishop Taylor. Your words and your heart always set a wonderful tone for our programs, and for that, we are quite grateful. Like the bishop, I am so glad that all of you could join us today for this second edition of Losing Truth. And as we examine the critical costs to our lives and to the future, may I say that our distinguished panel has so much to share. But before I introduce them, let me explain a little bit our format. After I interview the three, we will then do a breakaway and go into breakout sessions where you will each have an opportunity to chat amongst yourselves in order to discuss what you've heard or what your takeaways are. And also, you will then come back. You'll pick a spokesperson for you and then come back to us and share what you have learned or discussed. Sam Wiley, who you met at the very beginning here, will be explaining more about that. Sam is our diocesan program coordinator, and she does a fantastic job, and we thank her for that. But before we go too deep into the weeds, let me introduce our distinguished panel. The Honorable Andrew Guilford, retired, now serves as Judicate West as a mediator, arbitrator, and private judge. It was in 2006 that he was sworn in as a U.S. District Judge. He has sat with appellate courts for the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals in Washington, D.C., and the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. Judge Guilford has served as the president of the State Bar of California and president of the Orange County Bar Association. At the request of the Chief Justice of the United States in 2011, Judge Guilford served on the Committee on Codes of Conduct of the U.S. Judicial Council. He has authored a number of articles concerning the justice system and still finds time to have a strong commitment to community activities and is a faithful member of St. John Chrysostom Episcopal Church in Rancho Santa Margarita. Dr. Lois Sprague, who you met briefly a few moments ago, is the president of the Guilford Center, Religion Inside and Out, an interfaith spiritual organization begun by her late partner, the Reverend Dr. Gwen Guilford. Dr. Lowe is a trained Jungian-oriented psychotherapist whose background and focus on the cutting edge of human capacities and the nature of consciousness. When asked, she says that her presentations even on Zoom, aim to be experiential as they are cognitive. And the Reverend Paul Daniels is the new dean of Bloy House, the Episcopal Theological School in Los Angeles. He is also the rector of St. Mary's in Palms. He received a bachelor's degree in philosophy from Morehouse, and his Master of Divinity comes from Yale Divinity School. Currently, he is pursuing a PhD studying mysticism and the figure of the slave in Black Studies and Black History. He is also a lecturer at Marymount University. May I welcome the three of you and thank you all for sharing your afternoon with us. I want to begin by asking the three of you this question. Are you alarmed by the amount of misinformation, disinformation, conspiracy theories, and lies that we have going on and infiltrating our lives today? Judge Guilford, I'll start with you.
Definitely. It seems to be one of the things that is particularly cursing us these times. And I think it does come from both sides.
Yeah.
And I applaud this kind of a program so we can look into it, see what we might do about it. I definitely think it is a threat to us, and I applaud you, Dot, for helping to put together this program.
Thank you. Dr. Lowe, how about you? Are you alarmed?
Absolutely. Because I think we need the truth to be able to solve problems. And if we're not telling the truth, then we're not dealing with what the issues are. So I think it's one of the ways that we get led astray into looking at what people's agendas are rather than looking at what's really necessary to solve the problem.
Dean Daniels, what say you?
Yeah, I think in some basic way, I am alarmed by the ease with which people believe the things that they read. I'm not so much surprised by the work of misinformation or disinformation or conspiracy. I feel like that's been at the core of American politics for a very long time. You tell the story that's convenient for achieving the goal that you want, and that often requires cutting corners and not presenting all of the facts in the way that one perhaps should. So I'm not surprised, but I am alarmed at the ease with which people are willing to accept narratives without question about what those narratives are and where they come from and how they've affected our lives.
Can I jump back in, Dot?
Sure.
I spoke from a macro level. I must say a micro level. My job, the legal profession, the courts. It may have always been around us, but I think we are now more aware of things like implicit bias and the difficulties of eyewitness testimony, how two people can look at something and come away with different opinions. So I think in my line of work, we've been particularly focused on it. And things like the Innocence Project and DNA testing have revealed some pretty shocking conclusions about how we've gotten wrong the guilt or innocence of people to their detriment.
Very good. Let me go to you, Judge Guilford, and take you a little bit different direction, but not completely. The U.S. Constitution guarantees us freedom of speech. And basically, as I understand it, and you can certainly correct me, it shields us, the citizens, from governmental intervention, basically, into speech content or the ability to speak out and express our views. And it also, which I had forgotten about until I was kind of researching, kind of gives us the right to receive and impart information. This amendment was authored in 1791 when there was no social media, no cable TV news, no bloggers, no podcasts, no talk radio, no National Enquirer for anyone old enough to still remember the National Enquirer. But as we've seen recently, these venues have often been used to spew out basically what is hate speech.
Mhm.
And that hate speech at times provokes hate acts and hate crimes, to the point where we learn of bomb threats or personal assaults on different individuals or groups. My question is, when hate speech provokes hate acts and crimes, does the weight of the First Amendment and the freedom of speech still stand?
Absolutely. Maybe that's not surprising coming from a federal judge who's swore to uphold the Constitution, and the words are there. But you were suggesting that's an area that has grown. I would say there's nothing more hateful than Nazis marching in Nazi uniforms through Skokie, Illinois. And most of us are probably old enough to remember when that happened. And the ACLU came to the aid of those Nazis marching through Skokie. That was pretty hateful, and that was pretty hurtful. And Skokie had a particularly large population of Holocaust survivors. So I'm not convinced the issue of hate speech is worse now than, say, the 60s, when there was a whole lot of hate speech. But even if it were, I have great concern about the implication of your question that we can ease up on First Amendment protections. You know, the Supreme Court has had.
Oh, let me say, that's not the intent of my question.
I'm sorry. Okay.
That was not the intent of my question.
Then forgive me, and I'm glad we straightened those facts out. But I could read some news reports. Fox News contributor Molly Hemingway shared calls by her colleagues to imprison the debate moderators, to criminalize her view that the debate moderators engaged in illegal activity. And then we have a vice presidential candidate said there's no guarantee to free speech on misinformation or hate speech, and especially around our democracy. I shudder when I read those words. And so
let me ask you this, Judge. Let me ask you this. Where does the protection of speech, even hate speech, stop so that personal safety can be guaranteed? I don't quite understand that. Can you to us?
Okay, you broke up just a little bit, but I think I got the thrust of your question. It stops in the competition of ideas when we let everyone speak, everyone listen, and come to their own conclusions. Some people have said the worst thing for the Nazis in Skokie, Illinois, is that you let them march, and the people could hear alternative arguments and come to their own conclusions. The problem with alternatives to that is someone needs to be designated as the holder of all truths. Someone needs to have the power to say this is misinformation. I think that comes better through the competition of ideas in the marketplace. And I must say that's also how our judicial system works, the competition of ideas in the marketplace. And I shudder to think that someone would have the power to determine what's information or hate speech.
But let me very quickly, and then I'm going to move on to our other speakers as well. Because we have so many venues of information coming to us, a lot of it truthful, some of it not. And we basically have it 24/7 in our faces. Is it time to amend and update the First Amendment and make it applicable to 2024 rather than 1791?
No, I don't think so, because that update would require you to determine a board or a person to make these rules to shut up other people. And frankly, I have not been very impressed with those in our society who have taken it upon themselves to try and shut up other people. Now, unless you want to appoint me as the person with that right, I think even then, I don't think it's a good idea. So until you can determine a process for identifying hate speech or misinformation, I trust the American people ultimately to hear both sides and come to the truth. Now, maybe these days you can prove me wrong, but that would be my approach now.
Well, I wouldn't want to be the one, but let me move on. Dr. Lowe, let me ask you this question. And let me preface it by saying, I think we all can agree that words have power.
Yes.
In today's turbulent world, though, we are hearing words like fake, rigged, fraud, kicked around a lot. And to the point where it's making a lot of people question the validity and reality of what's going on around us, even things that we've actually seen with our own eyes or heard with our own ears. As a result, we start to question our own beliefs and our own truths and start to lose trust in others as well as institutions that we've always trusted and had believed were telling us the truth. Is it normal for us to question ourselves, or what's it doing to our psyches, hearing all of this misinformation?
Well, I think it's troubling to our psyches because, as you say, it is undermining our trust, and it's making us have to do a renewed search for what it is that we can count on, what we can believe in, and that's a very vulnerable thing when there are agents out there that are counting on that and trying to step in and fill that role. So it's a very disturbing thing, and I think it calls to us to help people step back and think about how they evaluate when something's true or not. How can they feel within themselves when they get clear of some of the implicit bias? Can they do some work? And what are the values that they use to say that something feels true to them or not? What does their instinct say about it? Often, it's often kids who have the ability to come in to adults and say, that's not real or that's not true. So I think it calls on us in the faith community to say to people, where do you find your truth? Where in yourself do you find your truth? And what's part of that question to me is, what does the information do to you? Is the information helpful to you? Is the information upsetting to you? Is it disturbing to you? How do you have a way to work with this information?
Why are we more apt to question ourselves, though, than the medium or the individual that's telling us what we recognize to be an untruth?
Well, one of the problems that we have is most of us have grown up in a culture, although that's changing rapidly around us, where we're taught that the stranger is often going to tell us the truth, that people have a good intention. That's part of the training that we go through with children often. As I said, that's changing right now. So, but we don't want to see someone else as a liar. We don't want to see someone as dishonest. And so there's a confusion that happens. Is this person tricking me? Is this person my enemy? There's an old saying in the field that I would rather be the one wrong person in a world of good people than the only good person in a world of bad people. And that's part of the dynamic that goes on.
Dean Daniels, let me ask you this. When we talk of our truths, and in particular, when we talk of our religious faith and the truths of our religious faith, so much of it is built on our beliefs. And beliefs being defined, if you will, through philosophies or convictions or teachings. But I'm wondering, are those beliefs necessarily truths when we think of truths as facts or realities or certainties?
Right. That's a very good question. So I'm a theologian by training and a priest by training. But I believe very deeply in interdisciplinarity. I think that religion is only as good as its ability to be in conversation with other ways of thinking, with other disciplines. And so it's as problematic as it would be for some Christians. I take the line that Freud took, that Sigmund Freud took in 1917, when he said the ego is not the master in its own house.
Yeah.
Or what psychoanalysis would take as basic, which is that the only truth is the unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
And that is to say, the only truth is that which we cannot actually access, that we are not transparent to ourselves as creatures. Now there will be some debate about to what extent that is the case. And so I take it as my own sort of starting point that belief is always already up for grabs in terms of its truthiness, in terms of in terms of how we interpret it as solid or concrete or eternal. And I think that that's actually what makes the Christian faith, and what makes many other faiths, but speaking from within my tradition, what makes it a really powerful witness is I actually think that Christ's ask that we remain in a position of questioning, that we remain in a position of irony, that our belief is actually rooted in a sense of self-questioning. And so that's how I would understand belief, as always already ironic, as always already in question, rather than a solid or concrete thing that we can count on to show up for us.
That was actually wonderful. Could I just jump in and say, Paul, I find that very powerful. And God obviously gave us a world of uncertainty. He didn't have to. And at times it seems like a curse. But I think it's a blessing from God, because in that uncertainty, and as we search that uncertainty together, as this afternoon, it helps define ourselves as Christians.
Yep.
Let me ask all three of you this, going from what we've just heard. Have any of you, or all of you, ever had your faith or your beliefs challenged or upended in any way in recent times because of the mass amount of misinformation and disinformation? Give you a moment to think there. You all look very...
Well, this might be minor and it might be too tied to my particular profession, but I have seen some exposés on the unreliability of people's belief in their eyewitness vision, in their testimony. And I have seen obvious examples of implicit bias that people don't even know about. So that has caused me to adjust my trial efforts, like I give more time for voir dire, like I alter the jury instruction on direct eyewitness testimony versus indirect testimony, things like that. That might be too much inside baseball, but it has caused me to change things as I perceive, particularly bias and eyewitness testimony are not as reliable as we had assumed.
Right. How about the other two?
Yeah, I'll say this. Misinformation specifically has not caused me to question my faith, and in part because one of the last sayings of Jesus in the Gospel according to Luke, as he's being crucified or about to be crucified, is "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." Now, there is something basic in the Christian witness that we have through Scripture. That human persons have always been vulnerable to their inability to know exactly what the heck is going on inside of their own minds and bodies, right? That there's always a degree of separation between what we think is the case and what might actually be the case. And so when Jesus says, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do, that's a symbol to me, or that's a sign at least, that we are mired in the midst of uncertainty. Or even when Paul says, and I think it's the 7th chapter of Romans, that his members deceive him, right? That there's a sort of deception within his own body. Or in the lectionary readings for today, the New Testament reading from the letter of James, there's this line about warring desires within us. And so I think if one were to take as the very basis of their faith, that there is no real guarantee, that we are always vulnerable to deception, then it's you look at politics or political rhetoric already with an understanding of that there's of skepticism, right? A healthy skepticism about what's being said.
Right. Lo?
I'm going to do a little pushing back, because I think there is, when we hear the truth and know, sorry, plain, that I think there is a moment when we know the truth, when we experience it, when we feel it in our body. I know that with interfaith work, that when I'm working with another community and there is that moment when they speak a truth that speaks to my heart, and I understand that that is a truth. That's a very different thing. That's at a very different level than a political conversation, than a political bias and that kind of pushing back and forth. I think that there are core experiences that we have, and that we need to know those and hold on to those. I know in Native people, there's a saying that they define God as that moment when the argument within stops, when there's a voice and the argument stops. And that is that moment of knowing a truth.
Mm-hmm.
And it's important for us to be able to hold to those things, or we can get caught in a sense of chaos all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we do seek after a truth, but I think it's also, I think we're talking about different levels.
That's right.
Of conversations, and that we have to be clear about that.
That's right. I think that's really fair. I think that's very important. Thank you, Dr. Lowe. I think to the extent that, to the extent that grace is operative, in the Christian faith, to the extent that we understand, Paul also says that the Holy Spirit intercedes on his behalf with sighs that are too deep for words. There is this intuitive sense, this intuitive possibility to touch the real, the actual, the ultimate, and holding that together with what it means to be a finite creature who cannot always at the same time have that truth contained, or sort of bring that feeling, that intuitive sense of truth to the surface, I think is the actual hard work of living.
Let me pinpoint all three of you just a little bit, kind of with this line of thinking going on. We have a presidential election coming up in November. And as with every presidential election or any kind of election, we are seeing ads and debates often drenched in hyperbole and campaign rhetoric, and sometimes, unfortunately, self-serving untruths, to the point that we as mere citizens are overwhelmed by what we're seeing and hearing. If I came to each one of you and in your professional roles, and I said to you, I can no longer discern the truth. I am so overwhelmed, I cannot discern the truth. What's your best advice to me?
My advice would be, don't give up. The truth is there. You can find it. And there are some techniques. And as I look at the journalists who I greatly respect and this country undervalues, I wish they would do a few things. Like in my job, we cross-examine people. John Henry Wigmore said cross-examination was the greatest legal engine ever invented for the discovery of truth. So what does that mean in a journalistic environment? I get so frustrated when the reporter doesn't ask the follow-up question, or even use some techniques I used to use as cross-examination, which is, sir, I'm going to ask a question. I believe the jury or the viewing public on TV will be listening carefully. And I will tell you, sir, and I urge them, listen to whether you ever say yes or no. And if they conclude you don't, please draw your conclusions. I've used that kind of argument to a jury. And there's other ways you can ask a question that gets beyond the fluff or even the lying. So I think things like that would be helpful. I also think even in our journalistic world, there's some, if you Google journalistic bias, you'll see charts of all the different journalistic organizations from the New York Times to Fox News to MSNBC, and it ranks them on a table as to do they lean left or lean right. And as a solution, I would suggest people listen to both sides. I recommend even the Daily Show, which I greatly enjoy, and consider, are they leaning left? Are they leaning right? Come to it with skepticism and draw conclusions. So I would say, don't give up. And there are tools that we can use to find that. Snopes is another one. Look at Snopes, see what they say. Don't even accept Snopes. I mean, be skeptical, but bring skepticism, logic, and these other techniques, and you may find truth.
Well, since you brought up journalistic follow-up questions, I've got a very quick follow-up question for you then on what you just said. You brought up biases. Very often, biases are tied in with prejudice.
Of course.
Not just talking about journalistic biases now, but the biases we all almost, and Dr. Lowe can either verify this, that we innately carry within us. That I have to assume shape our truths. So is it the truth that the journalist has a bias that you just don't agree with? Or is there another truth out there that they're simply doing their job and asking questions, trying to find the truth? But if you don't agree with it, you're not hearing it in the same way that a person who does agree with it is hearing it. Would you comment on that?
I think there are some objective measures you can use to determine whether the news source is biased. I could go through some of those objective measures. But I think most important, be skeptical. Be skeptical about your own bias. And I think the truth is discoverable.
Okay. Dr. Lowe, if I came to you and said I can't discern the truth, what are you going to tell me?
I'm going to listen to you. And I'm going to ask you to tell me more about that and try and dig to find out what's underneath that for you and help you sort it out through what it is that you're hearing. What are your reactions to what you're hearing? What's getting in the way or what isn't getting in the way? So I think we need to really listen to ourselves and go down the rabbit hole if we need to find out what we're hearing about that and what are our thoughts about that. I mean, I think we don't take the time to really think something through. And it's a process of doing that. And I think we often don't, with people, sit and listen to them and ask them and be with them as they search for the truth. We try to give them a quick answer. We cut them off. And I think it's really important that we learn to think, that we listen, that we think, that we take it the next step. Well, what does that mean? And what does that mean to you? And be present with them as they struggle with it to find the truth. And I'll also then deal with what are the implications of that to you, because that's the other piece of it. Really, what does that mean to you if that's true? How does that impact you? Because that's also often our resistance.
Let me ask you this. Something that we have believed in is not true.
Mm.
And whether it be, you know, political, you know, religious, you know, legal, whatever, but we've believed in it. And suddenly we're being told, no, that's not true. None of us want to feel like we've been duped. None of us want to fall victim to what's, you know, that kind of thing. Is that part of our problem in discerning truth then?
Of course, and when we lose a truth, there's a grief that's attached to that.
Mhm.
And I think it's very important to be with people as they grieve the loss of something that they believed in, and to be present with them in that, and then help them get a plan as to where do I go from here.
Okay.
Then what's my next step? But it's very, very important. And there was an interesting comment that was made last week that I want to go back to, when it was Farah who had worked with people in cults, and she said, you know, we live in a world where facts don't matter. And that's true in many instances, where the facts don't matter because I feel the way I feel and you're not going to make me change. And you can't convince me because I have this feeling. And I come back to that because we get in these intellectual arguments. And what's much more important than the intellectual argument, I think, is really being with somebody and helping them sort out what their values are, and giving them that sense that I understand how it is that you've come to believe what you believe. And if I had had your experience, I would be believing the same thing. And now that I've joined you in this, we may be able to look together at what are our next steps. Where do we go? But you will never get somebody out of a cult by arguing facts with them.
That's right.
Because we know truth in our bodies. We know truth we have a deep instinctive place where we know truth when we hear it, because there is a part of us that is profoundly connected to everything else in this world. We are relational beings, and often in these arguments, we're in an intellectual discussion that is parsing definitions, and we're not in touch with that place where we're connected. I mean, it's the indigenous people often will laugh at us in some of our arguments because they're underneath it to what it is that connects us. And that's really, I think, where we need to go. And the problem with the lying, and the cost of the lying, is that it pulls us further and further and further away from our own truth and the place that we're connected to, what is holy to us, what is meaningful to us, and the place where we're connected to one another. And that's crucial in all of this.
But cult or not, are we not more comfortable with like-minded people rather than branching out and saying, I'd like to hear a little dissent?
Well, yes, it's superficially yes, but I think we're more comfortable with people who we feel have a resonance with us, people who share our values. And when we're connected to those people, and when we make a connection to those people, we're often able to hear from them in that place something different, which is why you have the older Black man going around talking to Ku Klux Klan leaders and really listening to them. He's listening to them, and he's gotten 32 or 33 different Klans leaders to give them his outfits as they give up the Klan, because he's willing to really go and listen to them and be with them and learn about them. And in his humanity, in the places where they connect, they can no longer hold on to that old way of being.
Okay.
May I say that confirmation bias is very strong, and it is sometimes heartbreaking to lose your treasured views. But is it possible you can change yourself to celebrate learning a new truth, to say, I just got better. I used to think this, and now I see it's wrong. You know, that what there are no better apostles than a new convert, because they've got a new idea and a new truth. And wouldn't it be nice if we combined with our skepticism kind of excitement about changing our views?
Yeah.
Yes.
King Daniels, I need to still go to you and ask you what you're going to tell me when I tell you I can't discern the truth.
There's of course the therapeutics of it, which I think Dr. Lowe is right. Just to actually thinking together what Dr. Lowe said and what Andy said. Yeah, that's right. I mean, just the asking questions in the infinite regress of questions, right? You can never stop asking why, right? And why do you think that? Okay, well, why do you think that? Okay, well, what? And so creating a space wherein a person can actually think about, why it is they think what they think, which oftentimes by the second or third question, they're sort of stumped about why they think what they think. They hadn't actually done that kind of metacognitive work about their own ideas. And that just is what it is. But there's a second part to this for me. And, as this one's difficult because it is the case that, 54, over 50%, I think it's like 54, 55% of American adults read at only a fourth grade level. And we're dealing with information here that is thousands of years in the making often. So I'm a gay Black man. I've been consciously gay for most of my life. And so I never really had to struggle with my sexuality in reference to my faith. But I have tons of friends who have. And as Dr. Lowe said, intellectual arguments I've learned don't work. I can tell them, sort of anti-gay Christianity is kind of silly because it doesn't really consider like when words were invented, right? Homosexuality didn't exist as a concept until the 19th century, so it can't actually have been the thing that, folks are talking about in the first. And, I can give them all of these very in the weeds, intellectual, historical, critical, literary answers for why, Christian homophobia is a silly thing, right? But that's not what they're thinking about. I found it's two things. One of the things is to deny or to learn that there is a version of Christianity that can affirm queer people is to deny the folks that you loved who taught you this
Right.
sort of violent version of Christianity.
Right.
Is to say that Granny the Granny was wrong, that Mama was wrong, that all these people I love were actually wrong all of their lives about this thing that has structured their entire lives. And that's a difficult thing to accept. What's also difficult to accept is that, oh crap, my suffering might have been in vain. I might have been suffering because of a lie my entire life, and it could have been the case that I didn't have to suffer for that. So it must be the case that it is the fact that Christianity is a homophobic religion. And because I need for my suffering to have meant something. I need my suffering to have been what it was.
Yeah.
And so the second thing that I would say to people, and I don't know that I don't think that this is a great answer, but I do think it is an important one. Follow the footnotes. Follow the footnotes. If what you are reading does not have footnotes, there's an issue, right? If like what you are reading, if what you're taking in does not point to its references and tell you and show you its work, that is automatically a problem. And I think that we, when we're talking about truth and when we're talking about the excitement of learning new things and learning that we have been wrong about things and the joy that can happen in that, we're talking about a spiritual process. Reading, research is a spiritual process. It's not just an intellectual one. Just because you read something doesn't mean that you'll get it the first time, but that's a part of it. You struggle with it. You live with those ideas. They work on you over time, and you begin to see the world in a new way once you allow yourself to live with those ideas, those references. You learn how to track things down and ask questions. And so for me, the real target is, in part, is American education, or a part of it is how we, it's how we at a very young age teach our children and teach citizens in this country how to think, how to read, how to be critical. And it gets down to that level. So I would say follow the footnotes. As smug as that might sound, I think it is a real thing that requires us to take serious. What am I reading? Where's it coming from? How can I follow the trail?
Let me ask this question, because you've just brought it up so beautifully in connection with our children and our education and that type of thing. We often hear of the suppression or omission of truth, especially these days when it concerns cases of banning books. And thank you. I saw your eyes roll just then, Dean Daniels. But the banning of the books very often to cover or omit stories of homosexuality, the role of migrants in our history, the role of slaves in our history. And I'm wondering, with this, when we examine these things, and I know from my own personal story, I'm a journalist major. Never once in my journalistic education did I hear the name Ida B. Wells, who happens to be a fantastic Black woman journalist from years ago. Never was her name mentioned. For many people, when the movie Hidden Figures came out a few years ago, they learned for the first time the role that many Black women served essential roles in establishing the NASA space program. So my question to all three of you right now is, which is worse, a lie or the omission of truth?
Yeah, I would have to say, I think the omission of truth is, if I have to answer that question the way it was asked, I would say that the omission of truth is probably worse. I mean, a lie is something that can be engaged with immediately, right? There are words there. Whatever those words mean can be played with and refuted, and a conversation can be had. The omission of truth is insidious because it's all about narratives. Like, all of our lives are narrative, and if you don't have information to build out a narrative, then the introduction of that information after it's been lost, after it's been covered up, becomes, you have to question whether or not this is a conspiracy, right? You have to question whether or not, I love the Ida B. Wells example because it is, just like, yeah, who wants to focus on the work of someone who collected information about lynchings in the American South? And there's a great text that was published with Fordham University Press. I think is called The Edges of Political Theology or something like that. And in it, one of the essays says something that is just so clear and so wonderful. And she says that a part of the farce of identity in the West is to cover up or to avoid having to think through more harder truths. And here, this person's thinking about nationalism, patriotism, right? Where you want to suppress questions about slavery. You want to suppress issues with sexuality or the complexity of sexuality, because those things don't fit into this more general identity of what it means to be American, right? Or what it means to be pure, right? When you build out a political identity that is grounded in purity, it is very difficult to then have to confront the ways in which that purity is based on the elimination of other people. Right? It suggests then that the identity is not pure. And so I think that the omission of truth is more violent because it allows for the fantasy of pure identity or pure facts to exist in a way that I think is always already problematic, dangerous.
Judge Guilford, how about you? Which is worse?
I would say an outright lie. I do think people have the ability to go look and find their own books, regardless of what's being shown to them. And I must say, maybe I was particularly blessed, but born in 1950, growing up in the 60s in Santa Monica, California, going to Santa Monica schools, going to UCLA for 7 years, 68 through 75. I don't know that information was repressed. I mean, I remember the impact of books like Black Like Me or Malcolm X or writings of Dr. King on the race issue. And honestly, I don't think I was ever denied that information. And
Judge, that's happening today. There's a school district in Houston, Texas, that has closed down the school libraries. There are schools in Florida that are banning books. I'm talking about today.
I was just talking about my own experience, and I have to say, indeed, I was blessed. Now, on the issue of banning books, whenever I hear that, it's always important to check and see whether it's restricting books on the issues of age appropriateness versus banning books. And there are bad examples of banning books, but I think actually sometimes the restriction of books on age appropriateness is called banning. So in the pursuit of truth, we just always have to ask the backup questions. Whenever I hear people say that To Kill a Mockingbird was banned in high school, I always ask, where, how, show me the facts. And sometimes it kind of fades away and I don't get hard facts on that. But yes, I hear you say there are problems these days with banning books, and that's not a good thing. And I guess I was particularly blessed.
Okay. Dr. Lowe?
Well, they both have their difficulties, clearly. I think the problem with the lie is that it's something that you have to undo. It's not something that you just haven't discovered. It's something that you have to undo. And in that sense, I think that lies can be enormously dangerous, because particularly when we take them for a truth. The others, you know, I mean, it's an astounding thing sometimes to discover something that you didn't know. I remember being in Jerusalem on a Friday in the old city when the mosque was letting out, and just being in one of those narrow streets, and I could barely move as the mosque came, it was let out. And as I looked down the pathway in front of me, there were a group of Muslim men there, and there was a Jewish couple with a carriage. And as it moved towards me, I realized that what had clogged everything was the carriage. And it was these Muslim men who were trying to move away and make room for the carriage. And I suddenly found my body reacting, and I realized that I had carried this unconscious terror of Muslim men. And here were these guys making room for a baby carriage. And it was that moment of just going, wow, talk about unconscious bias. That wasn't a lie. It was it was a lie through movies, etc. But we can uncover things all the time. When there's a lie, we often don't even go look. And that's the destructiveness of a lie. We think it's a truth.
Yeah. I can I add, I think, you know, I think that is the case, right? When it's a lie, we often don't even bother to go look. But I think the issue is that we live in a country where the sort of the baseline is not to look. And, you know, Hillary Clinton was giving an interview the other day, and she said, the Trump campaign it was pressuring, the Harris campaign to put up their platform on the internet so that people could go look at their platform. And Hillary says, well, actually, Tim Kaine and I put our platform up for long that we published a book. Nobody cares about the platform. No one's going to read the book. No one's going to actually look.
You just froze.
Frozen a little bit here. Hang on, everybody.
You say no one's going to actually look, and then you froze, Paul.
Powerful.
You're
And
back.
Sorry.
You're back.
We're frozen.
Oh, I was saying there's something about political affect. There's something about affect in this country that has such a hold on how we think about and how we move, such that I think we have to take seriously. I think we have to take seriously that people actually searching for the truth, whether is maybe not the baseline.
Then let me ask you this. There's a term that has emerged in recent times. That term is the normalization of lies. And what that, to my mind, means is that it not only diminishes truth, but it delegitimizes truth in so many ways. And I guess what I would ask of you is that, have we reached a time and place in our lives, in our society, and in our nation that it's just easier to let the lies continue and just be out there than it is to fight for it or to confront someone who we know does not have the facts? Are we afraid of the ramifications that come from that? As far as, the bishop mentioned in his opening that, families and friends and faiths have been broken apart because of certain lies, but also the confrontation of the lies with what is believed to be the truth. Are we at a place where we're just tired of fighting for the truth and simply okay to say, well, lies are part of life and liars gonna lie?
I think we're just flooded with lies. I think we get flooded with lies. I don't know what happened to the term slander in this country. People used to be sued for not telling the truth. And we had a mutual agreement, a social agreement, that we were to tell the truth. Now, people always fudged at that, but I don't think there was the wholesale decision that we were going to collapse a value in the marketplace and say, we don't value truth anymore. And I think that's happened. And I think that's been forced upon us in some way with Rupert Murdoch talking, and it came with this entertainment news. When news didn't have to be news, suddenly it could be entertainment. And the boundary got blurred. And I think that we haven't been able to push back and say there's a value on getting truth. And we have to find a way to reset that. And it's one of the tasks that lies before us, or lays before us. We need to find a way to lift up the truth and to value the truth, because otherwise you get craziness.
Let me ask all three of you this before we go into our breakout rooms. Who would you say is more responsible for the loss of truth? Those who knowingly tell lies and spread conspiracy and misinformation, or those who know it to be a lie and don't counter it or speak up for it and let it grow?
They sounded alike to me. Could you repeat them?
Who's more responsible, the liar or the recipient who just lets it stand as a lie?
Well, I would say the liar, because
Yeah.
if not for him, we wouldn't have the problem. But I think both are at fault. And I share the doctor's comment that, I mean, the solution is we need to work to make these kinds of lies unacceptable, and programs like this are a good start, and skepticism is, and maybe some, Paul, maybe some good sermons from the pulpit. It is interesting what the Bible says about lying, but the point here is we need to give a new birth of truth here.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
I think that in a certain way, if we look at the liar in an oblique way, right? There are those moments in the Bible that are explicit about lying. Then there are those more oblique moments about how we might respond to the less than hospitable situations, or less than ideal situations. One of them is when Jesus is talking to his disciples about going out, and he says, you go to someone's house and they don't welcome you, dust off your feet and keep moving. There's a sense in which I think, sort of strategically, you cannot allow for the liar to determine your tactics, right? You cannot allow for the liar's abuse, their violence, to determine how you present the truth. There's a world in which you have to acknowledge, and again, I called Christian homophobia silly, right? I think there's a certain way in which you have to diminish the thing. You've got to make the thing small by really working to build a coalition of people who are willing to listen, and who are willing to do the work, and who are willing to be constructively skeptical, right? And I think that in that work of building coalition, the liar has no audience. But I think to continuously give stage to, or focus to, or power to this idea that we are offended and this is horrible and you're lying, is to give the liar what they want most, which is attention, right? And so I think we've got to be confident enough in what it is that we're doing and what we believe and what we're saying and where we're going, to actually sideline them and make them small a bit. And that isn't to say sort of completely ignore it, but to not give it the kind of spotlight that I think it probably wants the most.
Lo.
I want to go back to something that that Lance said last week, and he was our AI specialist. He was the go-to guy about is something true or not true, and he was talking about scams and phishing, and then he came out with a wonderful line, and he said, when you get a feeling that something's wrong? When you get a feeling that something's wrong? Okay, there is that part of us that knows when something's wrong often, when we get that feeling that something's wrong. And that's when we have to pay attention. And I acknowledge that we all have bias, but there is that place within us when we know that something's wrong, and when we have to believe that in ourselves, and when we have to stand up and speak out, and we have to at least challenge it. Part of this is our responsibility to not let the lies stand, and to say we're better than this, we know better than this. And that the Keyboard Center started that about the lies told about different faiths.
Yeah.
And how do we just stand up and say, that's not my experience of these people. That is not my experience of this faith. We have a responsibility to pay attention to ourselves, to be diligent, and to also speak up, both to ourselves and to others.
I once heard this saying, and I still struggle with it a little bit, so I will put that out there, but I put it out for the three of you as well. But it was that truth empowers, but lies embolden. Agree or disagree? The idea was the truth gives us confidence to do things. but the emboldening makes us bold to carry out certain things.
I think that's true on a psychological level, because as I said at the very beginning, that a lie doesn't give us a place to work. It doesn't help us solve a problem.
Mhm.
And when we have the truth, then we have something solid that we can deal with.
Right.
That's part of the importance and the value of the truth. It gives us something to work with.
Yeah.
I like that.
Mhm.
Well, this looks like a good time that we can go to our break rooms, our breakout sessions. I want to call on Sam Wiley again, and Sam, thank you again for overseeing this part of our program. I will turn it over to you now, and I will see everybody else in a few minutes.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dot. Thank you so much also to our panelists. This has been an amazing discussion so far. So as Dot mentioned at the beginning of our program, we're going to take this opportunity now to go into breakout groups. What's going to happen is that everybody is going to be randomly assigned to a group. We're going to meet for 12 minutes and we're going to discuss. We'd love to hear what your biggest takeaways have been. What has been the thing that has impacted you most in the discussion so far? After 12 minutes, we'll reconvene and we're going to call on each group to offer a reflection, a comment. Maybe you have a question for one of the panelists. Maybe there's something that hasn't been mentioned yet, or maybe there's something that you'd like clarification on. So absolutely, take this time to work through those things and discuss. So because we're going to be reconvening and sharing, please remember your group number, and also please select somebody in your group to be your representative. If no one is volunteering, then whoever's name comes first in the alphabet, you're the de facto representative. All right, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to open breakout rooms. You should be receiving an automatic pop-up to join your room. There we go. And we will see you all in 12 minutes. Enjoy your discussion. All right, welcome. People are joining us from their breakout groups. Welcome, welcome. All right, so I'm going to change our video just a little bit so we can see the whole room here. Welcome back, everyone, from your breakout discussions. All right, there we go. So we're going to go ahead and call each of our groups in order. We would love to hear about your discussion. If you have a comment, if you have a reflection, if you have feedback or a question for one of our panelists, we are eager to hear it. So I'm going to call on group 1 first.
Hello.
Donna, Jim, there we go.
Hi, I've been nominated to speak on our behalf. If you were here last week, I also spoke, but for the record, I offered to, for have another representative. However, we had a great, stunning, really, really interesting conversation. I think one of the key ideas that we were kind of discussing was what was brought up, the statistic about how the level of literacy of reading at a 4th grade level at the national level. If I might also ask, I would love to kind of, I know that was kind of mentioned by one of our speakers. I would love to actually follow the footnotes, and I would love to hear where that statistic was from, because something that we were talking about in our group was both, what does that mean? Like, is that something that has been the same over time? Like, are we, like, as an American society, are we kind of plateauing, or is it going up or going down? Something that I mentioned just in my my background in education was that also, is that a national statistic? Is that averaged? Because as we know, it varies state to state. And also, depending upon the state, different states have different literacy levels in the sense of like what is considered passing and those kinds of things. And we also got to the point of thinking, what does that mean from an implication standpoint? We talked about how sometimes in politics, it's been said that they actually encourage you to kind of speak at a 4th grade level, or to kind of dumb it down. In a cynical framing of that might mean, I want to dumb it down so that people just make it palatable, and people just, they just willingly take it and just willingly follow. But also, if something that I also brought up was that, but also a lot of issues are complex. So how do we both deal with the fact that our audiences, for various reasons, might be at a particular level, and it might be beneficial to speak to them where they're at, but then also at what point does that kind of dumbing down of issues make it very easy to be very reductionist and be like, oh, well, this or that, which you know, as anybody who's been in society, some, you know, solutions and many of our problems there, you can't just solve at a fourth grade level.
Great question. May I say, this is Andy talking. We spoke about pretty much that exact issue during the break amongst the panel. And I invite comments from the panel.
Let's go to Paul, who I think was the one who actually said that. And so
I
Paul,
was taking a bathroom break when the discussion was happening, but I've shared the statistics from the National Literacy Institute in the chat. It's below a 6th grade level, to be exact. And I love those questions. I think those are all important questions. And I shared that at the risk of being of sounding elitist, of sounding unkind. But that's precisely why I followed the comment with, I think a lot of our attention is on political rhetoric and is on aesthetics and is on affect, when the real issues are policy, like how our children are being educated, how our children are being taught to be critical readers, what's happening at the very basic level of early childhood education, right? I mean, so it wasn't to say that people are stupid and they don't read, and so it was to say that we have been strategically, systematically hamstrung in a particular way to not understand and be able to interpret and have critical conversations about the issues that we face every single day at a really complex level. And that's not the fault of that's no one's individual fault. That is a systematic failing. But we have to be able to say that there is a systematic failure. And because of that systematic failure, it does make it very difficult, I think, for and these are national statistics. It does make it very difficult to have national conversations about complex issues. You know, my best friend always says to me, well, Paul, say it at a 6th grade level, right? Like, how would you say this to 6th graders? And I think that there's import to concision and there's import to simplification. I think that those things, and clarity, I think that those are really important tools for communicating. I also know for a fact that some things, whether they be policy or heartbreak or health concerns, they have to be funneled through complexity. We can't rush to reduction, or we can't rush to simplicity, or we can't rush to clarity. And in fact, I think that the very ethic of rushing to simplicity and clarity and or concision, I think that those are rooted. That's an ethic that's rooted in a particular kind of market of ideas, or thinking about ideas as a marketplace, or thinking about it within capitalist terms, which require in many ways oversimplification or reduction for the sake of selling an idea or selling a product. And the life of the mind and the life of the spirit and the life of politics, the life of community is not about selling a product. It's about struggling through the difficult machinations of everyday life and how we have to live together. And so it's important, I think, that people, as I like to say, rush to the complication, not away from it. And I hope that answers some of your question. Sorry.
Okay.
Could I jump in with maybe a more simplistic statement to a very complex question and a very complex issue? You know, I might say, in the end, it's all about relationships, and we're called upon to love one another. And maybe here our hearts are more important than our minds.
Well, I would say there can't be a more important. The real complexity, the real struggle is to live in a world where we're holding both of those things together. To the ethic of a mind over a heart is a bifurcation of the human person that is rooted in a very particular kind of cultural ethos. The idea that the mind and the heart are separate. No, the complexity of the political work that we have to do is to bring those two things back into unity, not to suggest that they exist at different planes, but to try to unite them in how we speak and how we think, and to create new grammars rather than grammars that still exist in this like doubled sense, because in many ways, and we go back to this bit about desire, and we go back to this bit about the unconscious and getting in touch with instincts. We can't, sometimes we can't trust the heart to the extent that we don't even know what's there, or we don't know how we've been formed. We can't mark all the ways in which we've been taught to believe particular kinds of things. And so we have to use the mind as a means of critiquing the heart, and a heart as a means of keeping the mind in check in terms of approaching each other with humility or something like that.
Agreed. And I love the way our baptismal service says, give her an inquiring and discerning. And you think the word mind is coming, but really the word heart comes next.
All right. Thank you both so much. And thank you, Sable. It sounds like you guys had a great conversation in group 1. So I'm going to turn now to group 2 and invite Lillian or Maury or Sarah to share about your discussion, please. Go ahead and unmute yourself. Let us know.
I don't know. I thought Lillian was our great
Oh, I think
note-taker.
Lillian might be having a hard time unmuting. Let me help you out there, Lillian.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, having
There
some
we go.
challenges. Thank you. Yeah, I had a great conversation with Maury, and I'm sorry I didn't write the other lady's name, but we had a great conversation, and I brought up my interest in the question that Dot posed about who is, if I'm not saying this correctly, who is more at fault, the person that tells the lie or the person that lets the lie live on and stay silent. And one of the thought-provoking responses to that was, what we probably need to understand is that sometimes it's not so much that the person is being a liar as they are a believer of what they're spreading. And sometimes we have to be able to discern if it's their truth, their deepest belief in that, whatever it is, that lie that's spoken. But we have to understand that when we're engaging with someone like that, that maybe it's just because deep down in their hearts, that's what they believe, truth or not. Lies have a tendency to become the truth for people that lie resonates with. So when they're sharing their belief or lie with other people, more and more people are going to join the bandwagon because that's what resonates with them. And so one of the responses was, it's hard to keep up with good journalism when lies prevail or beliefs prevail. And we're forced to deal with those lies when imminent danger, such as the example was COVID-19. When it first came out and people, were all shut down and couldn't go anywhere. When the vaccines came out, there was this belief that it was not going to be beneficial for the public, that people shouldn't take it, that it had no effect at all. And yet hundreds and thousands of people died because they didn't. And had they made the other choice, we probably wouldn't have seen as much death as we did. So I just thought that was a really good example to that particular question. And I guess my follow-up question is, how do we discern when someone is a believer of some untruth or something that isn't true, as opposed to recognizing that maybe they're lying? How do we address that? How do we navigate that?
Dr. Lowe, would you like to address that perhaps?
Well, that's not an easy question.
It's not.
Thanks, Dot.
Anytime.
I think what's important to do with so much of this is to really try to listen to the person, to listen more deeply to the person, and ask them to tell us more about that again. How is it that you come to believe that? And so I even if they're passing on a lie, I think it's an important question to ask them. How is it that you've come to believe that? So it's a step. It's moving into finding a way to move into a relationship with somebody else. So we're not arm wrestling with ideas, but we're really trying to connect as a human being, because that's what's going to be most productive.
Lo, would you agree, and I'm just throwing this in, Lillian, you know, by using the word beliefs, by definition, beliefs are very often part of our teachings, our philosophies we've learned about, whereas truths may have more reality, be more reality-based and have more certainties and facts to them. If we go to a person and say, you know, how did you learn this? Is it believing a process of learning rather than perhaps just taking on something and purporting it then?
Right.
Am I on the right trail there?
I think you're absolutely on the right trail. You know, how is it that, you know, is this something that you've experienced? How is it that you've come to believe this? How is it that you know this to be true?
Yeah. Okay.
Excellent response. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yes.
may I also add, we're talking about beliefs and lies, and today we've been talking about lies, but I think we should be careful. I don't think it's a lie to have a belief about rent control. To say rent control works or rent control doesn't work isn't a lie. It's a subjective matter. You know, saying dogs are getting eaten in Springfield, I think is an objective lie. So we have to distinguish between what people, you know, some people's belief about a policy that's complex and has a lot of subjectivity versus an outright lie. I kind of learned that when I had to prosecute people for perjury. So when we talk about lies, let's be clear about the difference between lying about an objective fact and a difference of opinion on a subjective policy.
Very good.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Lillian. That's an excellent question.
Thank you.
All right. Room 3, Kathy and Mary, I invite one of you to unmute and share about your discussion.
Which Kathy?
Kathy Killen.
Okay.
Mary, do you want to take this? I see you're still muted.
Whoops, there we go. So there were two of us. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, absolutely. And following up on some of what was referred to about the truth and lies and responsibility, we spoke to the fact that each one of us has the level of responsibility, whatever position we find ourselves in, to seek whatever the truth is. And has been pointed out, when we recognize the truth, to be responsible in following up with that, whatever the appropriate action might be to take, and to help each other understand that in relationship with each other, we referred to the Valerie Kaur experience from the Sikh community of see no stranger. So it's not about the other. It's not about the person from another faith tradition. It's not about the person who's from, you know, some other belief system that we encounter. It's about how do we engage with each other. And I think taking in somewhat the positive rather than the negative approach. The other thing we touched on briefly, and I think, was the fact that we as human beings have the audacity to think that we're it. The truth about us is that we're this wonderful living set of beings on this earth that has the power that we do. And yet there is so much more about creation that actually knows a whole lot more than we do, if we could stop and learn about it. So understanding where does the truth lie in our relationship as human beings with the rest of living entities on this planet that we are responsible for, and that there's a shared responsibility, but kind of going beyond the fact of understanding what it means to be a human being in this country, on this planet, with each other, around this Zoom circle, So I invite Kathy.
Thank you very much for that, Mary. That sounds like an incredible discussion you have. Thank you so much for sharing that. All right, I'm going to turn to room 4 now. Invite JF or Kathleen or Kathy Shapiro or Marjorie. If one of you would like to unmute and share your discussion.
Yeah, that was my room. I didn't know which room we're in.
No worries.
Yeah, so we had a great discussion, and oh my gosh, I wanted to just preface by saying last week, the session went beyond my expectations, and I thought, like, sequels aren't usually as good, it might not, it's like it was so good last week, and then I was like, oh my gosh, it's even more like, so I just want to say there was so much. I just kept writing down, and I felt like we could have discussed for a lot longer. But anyway, so we touched on some of the things among many, freedom of speech. And I expressed that as much as hate speech is, detrimental, I would, and I don't, as much as I disagree, I would defend someone's right to say it. And then it was brought up, and yet hate speech brings serious consequences that can even lead to genocide. That even does lead to genocide, which is true. And I think and then who's to determine that, to decide that we shouldn't say fire in a theater. And so I think we segued into just being in the question, like, we don't know the answer. And then that kind of led me to, I love that Paul brought up that Christianity encouraged questioning, because when I heard that, being Jewish, I thought, wow, that sounds very Jewish, and it's not what I would have thought of as traditional Christianity. So I was really glad to hear that comment, and that, progressive comment on Christianity too. We talked about lie versus omission of truth, and that was a great discussion. And it was brought up that it's context, like there's not every conversation needs to have everything brought up. And yet when there's a intention there that's, suppressing historical facts or things that are significant, that's when it's a problem. Which is worse. That was a tough one. But I do feel that omission, I can think of examples that are happening today where omission of truth has led to some difficult narratives, because people are saying that they have the truth. So they're so entrenched into their narrative because it's true, but there's a whole nother side that they don't know. And we also included banning books on and contributing to that omission. And then let me see if and then there were so many wise things that were brought up when we were talking about learning a truth, that having a belief and then finding out that wasn't a true belief, and we learned another truth. And Dr. Sprague brought up how we need to be with that person and really go through it with them, because that's hard. And I love the emotional side or the spiritual emotional side of things that Dr. Sprague brought up. And then also I love the fact that Andy brought up that, and it can also be exciting. It could be hard, but there's also an excitement to opening up to a new truth. And so, yeah, those were just some of the things, and we could have gone on. The session ended when we were still going.
Yeah. Well, this is incredible. Thank you so much for sharing. These have all been amazing. Thank you all. So last but not least, I'm going to turn it to room 5. Love to hear what you all have to say. Anne, Bob, Faith, Muriel, or Ulu, I invite one of you to unmute and tell us about your conversation. This has just been incredible.
Well, I can give it a try for us, group. Is that all right?
Sure. All right.
It's great to see Ulu again. We talked last week, and Ulu being a member of Dot's Women Drivers Interfaith Group in South Orange County. Ulu, you stressed the importance of banding together on an interfaith basis so that we're of one voice and mind in addressing these critical issues. And so we certainly agree with you on that. It was wonderful to meet you, Faith Goldman, and to hear your perspective as a person of the Jewish faith who's been attending the Episcopal Church, and the work that you're doing at Trinity Orange, in addition to in South County at Rancho Santa Margarita. We took from your point of view the respectful nature of the interfaith experience that you've had. And sites, we were talking, I guess I raised the kind of despair of how can it be, as Judge Guilford said, that we're talking about people eating pets in any part of this country, much less in Springfield, Ohio, in the largely Haitian immigrant community. And you were right to point out that people are looking for the worst possible information about the other and to fortify their arguments in that way. I added a realization I had the other day reading something about William Randolph Hearst, that so-called yellow journalism is nothing new. And it was kind of discouraging to realize that we've been losing truth over time in various ways through the decades and centuries. And Muriel, you brought us right home with these very good thoughts that the question about AI and that age has allowed you to discern more easily about the truth, that sense of knowing deep within what the truth is. And that the AI point was follow-up to that this is good for correcting grammar and so forth, but who is that person? Who is AI? Who might be introducing bias into the way information is aggregated and synthesized? And as you said, the louder one has to scream about the truth, the more one becomes skeptical about how true that so-called truth may be. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Bob. Thank you very much. Sounds like these breakout discussions were amazing and in-depth, and I'm so glad to have heard from everybody. Thank you. So I'm going to turn it back to you, Dot.
Okay, thank you, everybody. That was so insightful, and I do so appreciate hearing from all of you and all your perspectives, and I'm certain our panel does as well. Before we close out, we've got a few minutes. I have one last question for you, panel, and we only have a little bit, so just kind of give me a quick answer. Who do you go to? Where do you go to for truth?
I'll take that.
Okay.
With a very Anglican answer, Hooker's stool. I look at scripture, I look at tradition, what have great people of my faith and the Judeo-Christian faith said, and I look at reason, and I think that helps me discern truth. You know, it's also similar to our government with three separate branches competing with each other, and out of that competition comes truth. And to come full circle, when I started out today, I noted that competition, the adversary system, competing ideas, and the marketplace of ideas produces truth. And I actually think the Anglican view of look to scripture, tradition, and reason, and you can often see truth. That's maybe on a higher plane. On the level plane of politics, you know, I mentioned, look at biases, tune in MSNBC, tune in Fox News, gather a lot of information, conflicting ideas, and apply your mind and somewhat your heart to come to the truth.
Very good. Lo?
I would say everything that Andy said, and prayer, because prayer leads me to the next place to look.
Very good. And Paul?
Yeah, you know, as a priest, my answers are obvious. So I'm going to go with, again, a more oblique response, which is the 20th century French literary theorist Jacques Derrida, in part because, you know, Derrida's work is to introduce you into a way of thinking that puts your own sense of truth in interminable crisis. It is the work of constantly turning over what you think. And I think that I find great joy in that exercise. So that's really who I go to when, aside from what is at the core of my calling, when I want to practice what it means to be in a position of irony, intellectual or critical irony. Yeah.
Can I just respond to the doctor who said prayer? You know, there's a question about whether the third leg of Hooker's stool is reason, sometimes called prayerful reflection.
Very good. I think I won't mess up what you've all said by saying I sometimes go to truth by reading Charlie Brown. You know, sometimes there's just a truth there that you can't get around. But this is the truth. My thanks to all three of you. It has been a wonderful time sharing this with you. And for you to share all your expertise with us has been such a gift. Really, really cannot thank you enough. My thanks also to Bishop Taylor and Canon Bob Williams, Sam Wiley, and each and every one of the members of the Ecumenical and Interfaith Program group that I have the honor and privilege of being the leader for. Everyone contributed something in bringing this forum together, and for that we are grateful. And I want to thank all of you who were participants today. As we noted earlier, this is being recorded. But if you were talking about it with friends and they say, oh, I wish I could have seen that, tell them that it is on the LA Diocese website and on the diocesan YouTube channel. So if you, in fact, want to go back and view or review anything, it's there. So as I close, I would like to share something with all of you from an author that I hold very dear. Not only is he an author, but he is a retired Episcopalian bishop, and he is an elder in the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. I speak of Bishop Stephen Charleston. In his book, Ladder to the Light, he has written this, and I want to share it with all of you. Truth does not get lost. Do not turn away from what you know is right, no matter the cost, because what you value in the Spirit is more precious than anything power or money can buy. It is your integrity. Be wise and be alert, for the practice of integrity is not as easy as it sounds. Some people will believe whatever they hear. Others will hear only what they believe. Some will say anything to get what they want. Some will want what you have, no matter what you say. Some will deny what you can see so clearly for yourself. Some will distract you with a card trick of the truth. But remember, the truth does not get lost. It gets hidden. My friends, with that, we close today, and I pray that all of you may know peace and truth and many blessings now and always. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks.